So I thought I'd just, have a chat with you guys and talk a bit about my experience. I think that's what I'm supposed to do. Maybe there's some questions or whatever. Just before I start, is anybody a Douglas Adams reader? No, okay, so there's this bit, I can use this joke then and I can get away with it because you guys haven't heard it. There's a bit in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series where the lead character Arthur Dent is seeking wisdom, and he goes to this planet full of philosophers and mystics, and he finds an old woman living in a cave, and it's a sort of wretched old cave, and dirt everywhere and piles of her discarded food, and it's a really, truly miserable experience, but apparently she's incredibly wise. And she agrees to help him, and she says, but first of all, you need to take my solar-powered photocopier out of the cave to help me. And both of them are lugging these things out, sweat pouring off them. It's a really hot day. The stench in the cave is so much that he almost has to go out and throw up. They pull the photocopier out. She says, right, here's my life story. I'm going to photocopy it for you. But maybe, just maybe, if you read it, and I've highlighted the most important decisions I've made, and you make the exact opposite decisions at every juncture in your life, you won't end up living your life in a wretched, stinking cave like me. So I just think that before you think that journalism is a great profession to get into, it is. It's totally amazing for those people who want to do it. But I wouldn't advise it for anybody who's unsure or light-hearted about it. I think that you have to recognise that it's a lot of hard work. There's a hell of a lot of rejection. There's virtually no job stability. That you quite often will earn far less than you would in doing almost any other thing, and that you are probably bright, young, shiny people who could go off and make a lot of money in the city or whatever, and that's a lot easier in many ways. And that's something to really think about, because I don't think our profession is getting any easier, and I think the level of dedication you require is getting much more. So I always try and tell people not to join. I think it's a better thing. But for those people who like it and enjoy it, there's absolutely nothing better in the world. For myself, I thought about being, I think the first thing I thought about being was the pilot of Concorde. Luckily, I didn't do that, seeing as they, it crashed rather spectacularly, and now they don't have them anymore. I wanted to do that, and then I thought probably being a lawyer was a good idea. This was about 13, and a friend bounced up to me at school and said, "What are you going to do when you grow up?" And I said, "Oh, I'm probably going to be a lawyer." And he said, "Oh God, that's really." I was going to use the F word again. That's really dull. I'm going to be a journalist. And I thought, wow, that's cool. It might have helped that I thought he was hot. But anyway, the idea of being a journalist somehow settled in me. And sort of a couple of years later, I went off and did my first work experience at a little local paper as a 15-year-old. And I was very shy, very introverted. I found it really hard work. But I loved doing it. And actually, at the end of that time, the editor, they had to fill in a sort of feedback form. And the editor, one of the questions on the form was, is Tris capable of being a journalist? And she said, well, he seems to be able to know what he's doing, he writes okay, but he is a bit shy and introverted, and journalists are mostly extrovert. And I took that really seriously, because by this point I really wanted to do it. And while I can come and talk to you and be on the TV and stuff like that, I still find that bit really hard. There's quite often stuff you have to overcome, and building up the confidence to, take on people in positions of power and authority, to question and challenge them, is not something which is very easy to learn how to do. And again, I think that you will, just because someone tries to put you off, like I have, it doesn't mean you shouldn't go for it. I think that that's a big lesson for me. I went to uni, I started doing my student paper. I think there's no better training. I think quite some of you, or all of you, are involved in Smoke Radio. Yeah, I don't know if any of you do any other sort of student journalism. Is absolutely the best way to learn, and because of that, I was the joint editor on that newspaper with a friend of mine called Tom, who actually works across the road as a newsreader for 2 and 5, radios 2 and 5. So he's done okay, He's we did that for a couple of years. I dedicated far more of my time to that than I did to my actual course, but I got through. And I imagine you guys might well be the same on that. And then immediately after that, looking for my first job, I was told that absolutely you wouldn't get a job on a local newspaper unless you had gone out and done the NCTJ course. And back then there were no degrees in journalism available. It just didn't exist as a degree course, otherwise I would have done it as a degree course. So I would have had to go out and do a year's postgrad. But one of my local papers, one of my friends had already been taken on there, and they were about to sack a member of staff who was rubbish, and they needed someone to fill in for a few weeks. So I jacked in my temp job with a temp agency shouting at me that I'll never work for them again after I, left them and, betrayed their trust. And luckily I didn't have to. I went in there for a couple of weeks, being again told that I'd absolutely have to go away and do a course before they would take me on full time. But after a couple of weeks, the team were finding it easier with me around than with the guy who they'd sacked. So they all went down to the editor and asked me to join. And one of them, I think it's my news editor, asked Bert, the editor, it's like, is the reason that you're being a bit reluctant because Tris is gay? And Bert, bless him, he said, oh, no. My old colleague Dave Millwood was a homosexual. He was the best reporter I ever had. So that wasn't the thing. Actually, I think, funny enough, I've been a little bit political. I'd done some activism at university around LGBT stuff. We'd done a demonstration gay wedding, and I'd done the press for it, and I got it into, the Independent, page 2 of the Independent, across all the front pages of the local press, onto the radio and all of that. And I think that the fact that I was involved in the student union might have been more against me than the LGBT stuff. And I've been out through my whole career, and I think that it's a really good profession if you're a bit different. And it doesn't really matter in what way you're different. I think that newsrooms now actively look for difference. And I think that that's a really good thing about our profession. So I did that for about 18 months. During that time, I did go away and take my NCTJ courses. I moved on to a local daily paper. But ultimately, I loved community journalism. I loved this idea that you could be part of a community and report on a community and go out and speak to all of those people who were making the decisions. But I didn't really very much care about the lives of the people of Reading or Wokingham. I thought it was a little bit dull. And I also wanted to move to London, partly because my car was about to break down. And in London, you don't need a car, and I couldn't afford to buy a new one. So I found a job going at a newspaper, which no longer exists anymore, called Pink Paper. And it was like a national LGBT tabloid newspaper. It's actually going through some hard times, but it looked like it would be fun. I met with the editor, and he seemed a little disorganized, and none of them seemed to really know what they were doing, but I thought, well, maybe I can make a bit of a difference. And so I went off and did that. And it was a bit of a sort of culture shock. I mean, I've been working in a sort of really aggressive news environment, and this was much more laid back, much more magazine-y, and I found that really hard to adjust to. I've been used to death and destruction, and I covered stories like the Paddington rail crash and so on. Well, I got punched and got into Press Gazette for getting punched, because we doorstepped the driver of one of the trains. I mean, actually, innocent enough in a way, but yeah, being chased down the road by this guy who wanted to punch me and the female reporter I was with was a little bit terrifying. But he actually turned out to be a really rubbish punch. Anyway, I digress. I joined Pink Paper, and just to indicate this thing I was saying about the sort of uncertainty of a profession, the lack of very clear job certainty a lot of the time. About 9 months after I joined, they made me redundant. I thought, I want to swear more times. Somehow when I'm doing like proper, like in a studio, it feels fine, and you resist the urge. But I think maybe it's the student audience, but it's not a TV studio. So I thought, oh no. But actually I got a bit of freelance work, and then a month later they gave me a call and they hired me back because they were that disorganized, and they gave me a pay rise and they made me editor. So by the time I was 25, I was the editor of this publication. I was completely petrified. I had no idea what it's like to be an editor. My last editor hadn't really, shown me the way. I was, the publication was slightly in chaos. It was, small, but we were running press days until 2 o'clock in the morning, which obviously ain't great. It's a sign that you're out of control. And the budget was cut to the bone, and the whole thing was a nightmare. But it was amazing because I was the editor of something, and I thought I just have to hold in against my slightly sociopathic bosses. And now this is going on YouTube, isn't it? I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about bosses, but I'm not going to name them. He's actually, I sort of saw Stockholm Syndrome in my ex-boss. He's a really lovely guy, but he used to, for example, put crystals underneath our desks and insist we didn't move them. And there was a story about there being a job interview he was conducting with someone, and he had in the corner of his office like this sort of like fake waterfall thing with a little sandpit and stones organised in a certain way. And he paused the job interview and he said, I'm sorry, this is just not working. And he went away over to the corner of his office and he took all the stones off and he raked this little sandpit like this. And then he put all of the stones back and he sat back down and said, that's okay, we can start again now. So he was a little bit like that. But on the other hand, it was an incredibly creative place. They used to go away on holiday, him and his partner used to go away on holiday to like Gran Canaria for 3 weeks. And they'd come back with this idea. It's like, well, we've been on the beach and we've had this idea to open another magazine. And you guys have got 2 weeks to design it, print it, distribute it, and make it work for us. And, and we were like, okay, but actually, that really taught me a lot, again, about setting up a project, starting it from scratch. That kind of stuff doesn't stress you out. Once you've done it a few times, works really well, whereas other people think, oh, you have to plan these things for ages. A lot of the plans didn't work, to be fair. And I think that, to some degree, the calculations were being done by the accountant, who subsequently left the company with a sort of big thundercloud and like bits of lightning and rain and hail coming down on him. But I think he was doing it on the back of an envelope, and ultimately it didn't add up. And as a result of that, Pink Paper was closed after I'd done it about 7 years. But I gave a call to someone. They'd been sort of slightly headhunting me for another job, and I gave a call to publishers of another LGBT publishing house, the ones who, well, they no longer run anything because they've just gone bankrupt a couple of weeks ago. But they used to run Gay Times Diva and a few other titles. And I gave them a call and said, you know what, this has just happened. Would you be interested in buying the newspaper? I had obviously no right to sell it. I wasn't the owner. But I negotiated a deal between my old publisher and the new ones. And again, within 4 weeks, I was taken back on and rehired as the editor and given a pay rise. So it all worked out in the end, and I was able, and my very, very tight insistence, able to rehire my team as well. And Pink Paper stayed there for a good 4 or 5 years. Under my leadership, and towards the end of that time I was asked to take on a couple of the other titles they did, so Gay Times and Diva, the lesbian magazine, and there was a youth magazine, short-lived, which they bought, called AXM, and we ran that all together. But it turned out to be a slightly miserable job as editor-in-chief, because my job at that point, and again, I can say some of this with a bit of a clear conscience because the company who was running this went bankrupt, as I say, about a month ago. I would have felt constrained before that, but they no longer exist as a legal entity, so they no longer have a reputation to defend, as you all know, from your law course, hopefully. So I think that they basically didn't have faith in publishing anymore. They had lost their will, their way, and they had seen circulation slide. While I was the editor of GT, so the one I directly line managed, and it was a hands-on editor of, our circulation went up 2% which I thought was amazing because everybody else's circulation that year went down by about 7%. So I kept on saying to them, no, it's not 2%, it's 9%, because we're bucking the trend by that much. So despite all of that and despite the success we did manage, my job basically consisted of making people redundant for 18 months and just bringing the team back into some kind of shape where they could fight on and then be told, no, you have to make a load more people redundant. And it was truly miserable. And I think in some ways, that was the sort of darkest era for publishing. It was a time when everybody knew that publications were going to fail and close, but nobody had really worked out anything at all about their digital presence. So there was no alternative for them to turn to some degree. And we kept on saying, well, you have to do digital. But for them, it was a leap in the dark, to be fair. They didn't quite know where to go. Anyway, on the way to see a Harry Potter film one day, I got speaking to my partner, who is also the chief photographer for my titles and was a photographer for a load of other people as well. And we had talked loads about us quitting and going and doing a new business. We talked about setting up a pie shop at one point. There had been a lot of talk about cupcake shop, and Scott has never forgiven me because cupcake shops weren't a thing back then, and now they are. And every time we pass one, and obviously making like shed loads of money, there he goes, we should have done that when we had the opportunity. There was one time when we almost bought a beach in Cornwall. That would have been cool. We would have had no idea what to do other than, like, you know, sell lollipops, but it would have been awesome. So we talked about all of these businesses, and I think he'd been thinking the same thing. It's like, ultimately what we knew was media, and we would be crazy to quit it. And actually we particularly knew LGBT media, and we didn't think anybody anywhere in the world was doing it very well. The obvious thing was nobody was doing a 24/7 rolling news service for LGBT media. News had turned 24/7 for everybody else ages ago. And I worked out that it was very easy to do that. You just needed a full-time reporter in, like, Hong Kong, a full-time reporter in London, and a full-time reporter in LA. Those are 3 8-hour shifts. Put them together, that's 24 hours, and they just go on loop forever. And once we figured that out, Gay Star News was born. I mean, it wasn't quite that simple. I quit my job about 6 years ago. My maths might be getting wrong. And we spent about 6 to 9 months business planning. We raised a significant amount of money, you know, more than enough to buy a house. I'd never just gone out to strangers and said, I've got an idea, would you want to give us money? I had no idea. Neither of us had any idea how to do that. I had never done I'd done budgets for the publications I worked on, but I didn't know how depreciation worked, or how to work out what your tax might be, or, you know, what a lease might look like for a publication, you know, if we have to have an office, and all of those things were complete mysteries to us. And as I said, no idea at all, other than we had a little bit of money in the bank. But we decided to just say, you don't get anywhere unless you do it for yourself. And we risked it. And we started, officially, we launched in about January 2012. And I think we were a little bit taken aback by how fast we grew. We had these sort of nice graphs which do that. One thing to realize, if you ever go into business for yourself, the graphs never do that. They do this. It's like crazy. And the whole thing is like a roller coaster, and you're gripping on for dear life. And again, I can be, our business is in a stable position now, just in case you're watching on camera, anybody. Our business is in a stable position now. But it wasn't always. And, you know, the first couple of years, you know, most businesses fail in the first couple of years. And there was a couple of times where we had to go back to our investors and said, you know, you gave us all that money. Well, actually, we can't pay the payroll in 2 days' time. And I think we went into it thinking, oh, it's okay, we'll do this business, we'll make some money for ourselves, and we'll do some good. But I think that over a period of time, what we were doing sort of got under our skin to a greater degree than we expected to. And at those points, the pressure of having a staff who we were paying and who were relying on us for their careers, and the amazing things I think we were already achieving for people out there in the real world, and the joy of the job, was what I didn't want to get taken away from me. My own money and Scott's money, well, you know, it would have, like, been very awkward because we were living on credit cards anyway. And I don't know how we would have dealt with it. But I think that it really pushed us, having all of those pressures pushed us to keep on making a success. And, you know, we didn't know anything about sales. We had to go out and find how to sell to big corporate companies. And, you know, that's been really hard work. There's been so much we've had to learn. But it has been an incredible experience, and our team now has grown. We've now got, 12 people in the London office. I've just hired 2 more people who are joining in a few weeks' time. We've just hired a new correspondent in New York, as an example. So the whole thing is really exciting. And I think that we're now going to go a couple of places. First of all, a plug. One of the things we've literally just sold, it's taken us a while, but I had the contract back today from Deloitte. So Deloitte and Clifford Chance have undertaken to sponsor a student section of Gay Star News, which we think is great. And we're really excited about it. And we're working with the Student Pride guys, who I know you work with really closely. And they're going to be part of it. And we have just hired Jamie from Student Pride, who some of you probably know, to be our student editor. He hasn't told his bosses yet. I just realised that. That's okay. They won't watch this anyway. Let's make sure he signs his contract and sends it back to me, I suppose. But the whole thing is really exciting. And some of our clients now, we're able to work with international brands. We're able to work with. We've just taken on Snickers in their first thing they've ever done in the LGBT media. Turns out the people who own Mars is still a family, and they're Mormon. And the family who own Mars had to sign off on our deal. That's why the deal's been 2 years in the making. But actually, that's really cool that they wanted to do that. And they didn't quibble or dither on it at all, apparently. They said, yep, we're going to do that. It's the kind of thing we should be doing. Which shows that, I don't know, not all corporates are evil and not all Mormons are bad. I don't know what it shows. But it's really cool. We are now looking at what the future will be, because the digital landscape is forever changing. I think that in a couple of years' time, about 50% of our content will be video. Now, it's not. I think that we have to broaden our offering. We're looking at taking on the labs team as part of the next investment round to start developing technology for ourselves. International expansion is huge for us. We've got huge readership, millions of readers in the US who we don't serve very well. And then after that, I've got sort of big ideas about South America and translated versions and all of this other stuff. And so you have to keep on innovating. I think that we are going back to the drawing board now and saying, the way we started was by realising it from the audience point of view, that there was a problem, there was a need which is not being solved. After 5 years, you can start to look at it as what your problems are as an institution. You know, you're a company, you've got to keep on making money, you want to expand for whatever reason. So what do you need and what can you provide? Actually, we've said, no, we need to go back to being disruptors in the marketplace, start with the audience and look at what they need. And I think that we've got something which might be convincing, but only time will tell. So, you know, the same story applies. In 5 years, I'll either be in a beach hut or in a mud hut, I guess. And you have to chuck it out there with media. I think there's no other way. The other thing people always ask, I don't know what people always ask about media. I guess people will want to know 2 questions. First of all, how do you get in? I can't tell you because I haven't done it for a long time. I suspect it's harder rather than easier. But if it was me, I would focus on those most important skills. You know, first of all, the basic journalistic skills. Being really good at your writing, you know, reading things like Harold Evans' Essential English for Journalists and really focusing in on your writing if that's what you're doing, or the equivalents if you're in broadcast. Secondly, learning those things like media law, spending your time with McNay. I'm getting all my staff to spend time with McNay. I've bought them all fresh copies of a book, and I'm going to be testing them over the coming weeks. We're starting out this week because, you know, the risk is truly terrifying. I've hardly ever been sued, and I've always managed to settle really quickly. I think 20 years in media, I've had sort of 2 really meaningful lawyers' letters I've had to settle on, and a few problematical people who I've said, yes, go ahead and sue me because here's why you're not going to succeed, and they've gone away very peacefully. But McNay is obviously an essential. Learning skills which people maybe don't value anymore, like shorthand. I'm a big believer in that. I think that's so important. The other bit, I would say, is learning new skills. So if you're in written journalism, I don't think enough people learn about video. I don't think people learn about the commercial side of a company. You know, if you wanted to be in media, but you didn't think you wanted to still be in journalism, please go into sales. We need creative people in sales. And actually, you can make a lot of money. I will give you not only a great salary, but I'll give you 10%. So, you know, you can make a lot of money that way. It's actually, that's the bit I want to plug. That's go into sales, people. We need creative people like that. But, you know, I'm trying to get my guys at the moment to get interested in video journalism. As I say, it's going to be the way of the future. I think that's really important. But beyond all of that, I think that there's been a sort of switch where people are more focused these days on Googling and emailing and whatever to get their information. There is nothing on Google which isn't already published. If you're ever going to get an exclusive, you know, you need to go out there and meet people face to face. You need to call them up and pester them. You can't put someone on the spot via email. I think as I said before, I think our job is an enormous privilege. And I think for the good we can do is huge. I think that we can do more good than most people get to do in their lives in a day with a bit of effective journalism. And I think that we need to take that seriously, and I don't think you get anywhere by Googling stuff which people have already published. So I would really, you know, urge you to develop those skills, you know, learn how to get on the phone and interview someone, learn how to go out and interview someone face to face, even if you haven't got anybody much to interview, even if you haven't got anybody interesting to interview. What else do people always want to know? People always ask you what your best interview was. So I'm going to answer that, save you bother doing it, because I really don't have one. I think my best interview has been with people who've really gone through a completely crazy, trying to not use the swearing words again, completely crazy life experience. You know, either terribly good or terribly bad. I think one of the privileges of a job is we get to see people at their very best and their very worst, and that's kind of fascinating. So it's not the celebrities, but seeing as name dropping is always required in these conversations, some of my better moments have been having a bacon sandwich in the morning in Downing Street with one of the prime ministers, not the current one, I should say. I remember doing a couple of hours of rubber stamp printing with Ian McKellen at his place. His house is hilarious, actually. He's got a really stunning place on the river. And outside, he had this, on this pillar on the Thames, he has this sculpture by Gormley. Anybody know Anthony Gormley, the artist, who does these amazing iron sculptures? There's a place up in near Blackpool, is it, where there's a beach of all of these sculptures walking in, and they have to put up special notices because people keep on calling the RNLI for them. But he has this sculpture in the river, and I was like, wow, you got a Gormley, that's amazing. And he said, oh yeah, but my neighbour didn't like it. And she complained about it, and he apparently said to the neighbour, well, I've just added £20,000 to the value of your house, you stupid woman. And it turned out that the reason why she objected to it is she knew someone who had drowned. And he felt bad after that, but he hasn't taken down the sculpture. Anyway, so you get to do some fun and interesting stuff. You get to travel, and all of those experiences are incredible. So I'd say when those things come up, put yourself in their way, take advantage of them. They're good fun. I have no idea maybe if I've answered the right things or how long I've taken to waffle on. But you said to talk for a bit and then we'll ask questions.
I'm trying to think of a question now. I've got one. What's your kind of plan for obviously a lot of news is consumed online and through social media now, so what's kind of your strategy and plan for that? You mentioned you do quite a lot of video and want to do more.
News, right. I think that what we're focusing in on is exclusivity and quality. the social media thing has completely skewed the picture, I think, for journalism over the last few years. And it's taken us a while to figure this out. Clickbait, effectively, has become very easy and very shareable, and you could get big hits really quickly without much effort just by rechurning and recirculating old rubbish. That's fine and it's valid as far as it will go because it's been a way people have found themselves through the digital landscape. But going forward, anything which isn't exclusive, I don't think is going to be read or paid attention to or enjoyed or consumed. So I think that I'm really going back. I think our quality is already better than most people in the LGBT media, but it's like 1/10 of what I think it could be. And we're really going back and focusing in on everything we do should be exclusive or should be well checked out. We want to be breaking stories rather than aggregating stories. And actually that's my plan. So, you know, who knows what the social media algorithms are going to reward in future. I think that instant articles on Facebook is probably going to have its day relatively soon. It's already moved away from that, hasn't it, and into video. And Zuckerberg, once he's got us all sucked into the video thing, will change his mind again, and it will be something else, or it will be harder for us as more is produced. So we have to not play that game. In terms of getting an engaged audience, we're lucky because our engagement level is higher than most, and people's willingness to comment, share, etc. on stories is higher. But what we don't particularly have as a weakness, we have a huge level of social media following, but we don't have a distinct sort of email style membership beyond that. And I'm not going to tell you the plan, but we have a plan, including perhaps a merger with another organisation who does something slightly different, but which would enhance what we do, which would give us access to a really great membership from the outset in very much our space, and then we'll go from there. But yeah, it's not easy. Despite all of that, I think that we probably focus too much on news, and I think that some of our focus in the future will go on to timeless sort of feature style content, because there's a really long tail to that and it tends to deliver the best. And the other thing we will do a lot more of, I think, is events. We just did our Digital Pride event, which is an idea we had, I don't know, about 2 years ago. We've just done our second one. And we thought, oh, wouldn't it be great for there to be a pride literally anybody in the world can be part of? There's lots of people live in countries where they can't go and march in their capital city. And we thought, yeah, well, we could do that online, and all they need is this little iPhone screen or, you know, cheap, generic phone screen in order to take part in it, and they can watch video and they can comment, and it can be politics and it can be entertainment and it can be all of these other amazing things. And we thought, oh, maybe a couple of million people will be interested in that. And in the first year we got a reach of 25 million, and this year we got a reach of 55 point something million. We just did it a few weeks ago, and I think that by 2019 we will certainly be the biggest LGBT event in the world, and we will make it really cool. So that kind of thing can bring audiences in who then like and trust you for future.
What's one tip or something that people should keep in mind every time they're writing an article, would you say?
I guess, have you gone, I mean, this is really simple, but have you gone to everybody you need to go to and have you asked them everything you need to ask them? And have you been open about it? My favourite interview question whenever I'm chatting to someone, I always ask at the end of every one, is to say to people, is there anything you wanted me to ask you which I haven't? And a number of times I've got someone to say, oh, well, you didn't ask about this, or, well, this is also happening, and got an exclusive story out of that is unbelievable. Simplest question in the world. The other thing I always say to people is, I want you to imagine that I'm 9 years old and explain it to me like that, because people get very technical and so on, and otherwise you're constantly translating quotes. But yeah, I definitely think about that. I think as well, people fail when they are writing an article to think where it goes next. News needs to self-generate to some degree. So what are your follow-ups? What are your features? I wonder if courses encourage you to do that a little bit. But I think, you know, if you've just written a news story about this, is there a feature in there? Is there, you know, an event in there? What else could you do with it? Could you turn it into a poll? Could you embed a poll on the site, in the article? Whatever it might be. I think that's really important. And I guess in radio the same thing applies. What other special guests could I get in later in the day to discuss this? Who's worth commenting on it? Who could we go out and vox pop on the street or whatever it is?